In this lesson, you will learn how to identify direct and indirect objects. A direct object receives the action of an action verb. It can also show the result of an action. Direct objects will always be nouns or pronouns, or sometimes they can be word groups like prepositional phrases, although we're not going to address that in this lesson. A direct object basically tells who or what receives the action of the verb. So in the sentence, I gave my son some toast for breakfast. I identify gave as an action verb. To figure out what the direct object is, I would ask, what did I give? I gave him toast. So toast is the direct object. In the next example, he ate it enthusiastically. Here again, we're looking for the action verb, which is ate. And then we ask, what did he eat? He ate it. Therefore, it is our direct object. In the sentence, my husband grows raspberries in our garden, our action verb is grows. We ask, what does he grow? And our answer is raspberries. Therefore, raspberries is the direct object. Be careful not to confuse direct objects with predicate nominatives because both are going to be nouns or pronouns. Sometimes students get confused and just find a noun and say, oh, it must be a direct object. Make sure that you're looking to see what kind of verb you have before deciding this. Direct objects receive or show the result of an action verb. This is one reason it's really important to identify what type of verb you have first. So, an example, I bought a new scarf at the mall. Bought is my action verb. What did I buy? A scarf. That's my direct object. Predicate nominatives, however, follow linking verbs and they rename or identify the subject. So in the sentence, the scarf was a gift for my mother's birthday. Was is my linking verb. Gift is a predicate nominative that renames or identifies the subject of the sentence, scarf. Indirect objects tell us who receives the direct object. It's important to note that if a sentence does not have a direct object, it can't have an indirect object. There'd be nothing for it to receive. So not all sentences that have direct objects are going to have indirect objects. So again, taking the same sentences we were already looking at as examples. In the sentence, I gave my son some toast for breakfast. We've already identified that toast is the direct object. So we would ask, who receives the toast? In this sentence, it's my son. Toast is the direct object. Who receives the toast? My son. He's the indirect object. In the sentence, I bought my mom a scarf for her birthday. We've already identified that scarf is the direct object, so we ask who receives the scarf? My mom receives the scarf. Scarf is the direct object, mom receives it, therefore she's the indirect object. Here is your basic sentence pattern for action verbs. The subject comes first, followed by the verb. Then, if there is an indirect object, it will come after the verb. When there is an indirect object, it will be after the verb and before the direct object. The direct object will be last. Of course, you can have other modifiers, other clauses, other phrases anywhere in this basic pattern, but this is your basic essential pattern for action verb sentences. Basically, what's happening in a sentence like this is that someone does something to or with something to or for someone else. So here's an example. Carly knitted her pet dachshund a blanket. Carly's the subject. Knitted is the action verb. Carly, what is she? She's the someone. What is she doing? She's knitting. What is the something she's knitting? A blanket. So that's my direct object. Who is she knitting the blanket for? the dachshund. So that's the indirect object. Be careful not to confuse indirect objects with objects of prepositions. This is yet another reason, added to our list of probably a dozen reasons already, yet another reason why we have to know prepositions. In the sentence, I gave my son some toast for breakfast. We know that toast is the direct object and son is the indirect object. In the sentence, I gave some toast to my son for breakfast. It essentially has the same meaning. If we saw this being acted out as a play, the same things would be happening, but it's different in terms of its grammatical construction. Toast is still the direct object. It's still what is being given. However, son in this sentence is not an indirect object. It is the object of the preposition to. So when I have a prepositional phrase, that prep phrase cannot be the indirect object. Come back to your basic sentence pattern. In the first sentence, subject I plus verb gave plus indirect object son plus direct object toast. In the second version of this sentence, toast is a direct object. There is no indirect object. Let's look at another example. I bought my mom a scarf for her birthday. We've already identified scarf as the direct object, mom as the indirect object. We look at the same sentence written a slightly different way. I bought a scarf for my mom for her birthday. Scarf is still the direct object. However, there is no indirect object in the sentence. Mom is the object of the preposition for. Okay, so look at these patterns. Remember this rule. This is one of the single most confusing rules regarding identification of indirect objects. Okay, so here are your basic steps for identifying all the parts of the sentence, including the objects and the complements. As we've been doing, first, find the subject. Who or what is the sentence about? Then you need to find the verb. Next step is to determine whether the verb is action or linking. I recommend labeling it. Write an A above the action verbs or an L above the linking verbs. If you have an action verb, then you're going to ask, is anything receiving the action? If your answer is no, then there is no direct object in the sentence. If the answer is yes, then whatever is receiving the action is the direct object. If you have a direct object, then you're going to ask, does anything receive the direct object? If your answer is no, then you don't have an indirect object. If your answer is yes, there are two possibilities. The first is that there is no prep phrase or that the thing receiving is not in a prep phrase. Then you have the indirect object. Remember that the indirect object will come before the direct object in the sentence. The other possibility is that you do have a preposition and that this would be the object of the preposition. Now, if you have a linking verb, you need to ask this. Is the subject being renamed by a noun or described by an adjective? Remember that all linking verbs are followed by a complement. If your answer is noun, then you have found the predicate nominative that renames the subject. If your answer is adjective, then you have found the predicate adjective that describes the subject. That's it. Those are all the basic parts of the sentence. Yes, it looks complicated, but if you get in the habit of going through this process, it's going to become faster, it's going to become easier, it's going to become second nature.